Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. In this episode, we follow up with a tree that was full of honeybees back in 2023, and we initially removed them and reduced the population quite a bit, as you see some of that footage here from 2023. But we went back again this month in February of 2024 to follow up and see if any had survived for the winter. And sure enough, we found some more in there. So this video will show you a collection of some additional bees that were still in there during the winter. They had set up a pretty amazing looking winter home inside that tree. As you'll see here, even though snow was on the ground, frigid temperatures, it was probably 22 degrees out, your fingers would just go numb in minutes. Still, they were perfectly comfortable inside that tree, which was upwards of 95 degrees in the cluster of bees. On our two collection days in February of 24, it was in the low 40s on the first day, and on the second day it was snowy and 22 degrees. We did this winter extraction with Tony Andrick's Beehive, which performed great even in super cold weather. We also used an extendable hose, a clear hose, that we could fit down into the knot holes of the tree, and the bees were collected in the collection jug you see here. We also used a scope cam again. You'll see that footage in the video today. So let's take you back to the beginning of this winter extraction on February 14th, 2024. All right, it's February 14th, 2024. We took some bees out of this tree last season in 2023. We extracted them from this hole in the tree. There were thousands of them in there. We plugged that hole with plastic after we removed the bees. And so far the plastic remains in place. We later in the year saw them coming back, being reestablished in this hole in the tree. So we know there was some that survived and tried to reestablish a hive back in September of 23. So we waited out the winter, and now that it's approaching spring, today's in the 40s, it's nice and sunny and warm. It's February now of 2024. So we're going to take a scope cam, which is this device. It's got a screen on it and a fiber optic camera. We're going to put that cable with the camera on it through this hole and see if we can find evidence of surviving bees. If they are in there, chances are they'll be balled up around the queen. It'll be about 95 degrees in there, so they'll have no trouble surviving the winter, even on cold winter nights. They stay nice and warm in there that way. So they may be alive. We may be able to see them if the camera gets access. It depends on where it is. If it's way down deep or way up high or around some strange corners in there, we may not be able to get any imagery, but let's see what we can do. So here we switch to voiceover. This is footage from the scope cam. We had just hooked it up and all of a sudden a bee flew in, as you see there. So even though it was only 42 degrees and it's only early February, the bees were already beginning to come out and forage, which is really early in the year. Historically, you're not going to see a lot of sunny weather in the 40s in the early part of February, but with climate change and the resulting effects on the local weather, things are starting to change. There's more frequent freeze and thaw. So we put the scope cam into this new hole that we thought they were coming into, and sure enough, there they are. A whole bunch of bees around some pretty healthy looking comb. As you see here, they're all clustered up together, and they typically will cluster like this all winter long. They'll stay inside the tree and they'll cluster, and through the wings beating and the heat generated, they'll get that interior of the tree up to about 95 degrees in the little cluster of bees that they have around the queen. This ensures that the queen survives and that most of the bees survive throughout the whole winter. And they feed on the food that they stored up in these combs, which is honey and pollen. And this way, all of the bees, as many as possible, can survive all the way through the winter until springtime when it warms up. Then they'll go out and forage again and begin collecting food from the environment when nectar flow begins in the spring and there's food available. Right now, there's no food available outside. So the bees might come out a little bit, very briefly. They'll realize it's very cold, and they'll turn right back around and zip right back inside the tree. and this keeps them alive. But if they wake up too early like this, there is no food. They would starve on the outside of the tree, and they would freeze to death pretty quickly. So they have to live on the food stores inside in the honeycomb that they built up over the season last year before the winter. So as you can see, there is one or two little guard bees come out, a couple little foragers here and there, but none of them stay out long, and they come right back in. So the scope cam, as you can see, has very low resolution, so it looks very blurry and so forth, so we apologize for that, but that's the best the scope cam can do. So we went around the other side of the tree with the scope cam, where we had entered the tree last year in order to extract thousands of the bees that were in there during the 2023 season. We had plugged that hole with plastic wrap, and that plastic was still there, so we decided to get past that plastic wrap and go down through that hole again and see how much activity was on that side of the tree where we had extracted from last year. We saw a lot more comb. There was capped off comb. It looked like, it was a little hard to tell with the low quality image, but it looks like larvae, also honey stores, capped off honey, capped off larvae. They seem to be very active in there, and the healthy comb that we saw, some of it was very clearly filled with honey stores, and the rest, it was hard to tell if it was larvae or maybe capped off honey, but either way, these were very active looking combs. But we didn't see any bees immediately. As you look through here on this side, unlike the other side of the tree where we saw a lot of bees right away, here we only see the actual comb. And with the scope cam, it's always a little difficult to try to work it through areas where we can see better. But we eventually were able to get it back into another angle inside that same hole, and we ended up seeing some bees. So there were bees actively working in that side, and they were probably coming over because they heard the commotion and saw maybe some of the light coming in, and they started moving from the other side of the tree over toward the activity here. So we're not bee experts, but to us, to our untrained eye, when it comes down to bee structures and what they create with their wax, it certainly appeared to be a very healthy hive, healthy comb, plenty of food stored up in there for them. So we knew right away this was going to be another very active hive that we were going to have to reduce the population on and try to get out of that tree. This was to keep the homeowner safe. So when springtime does come and the warm weather is here, she'll begin mowing the lawn. And when she mows the lawn directly below this tree, it will stir up these bees and she could be attacked. And we don't want that. So we're going to try to get them out early at the end of the winter here. And it's not just the homeowner. There's also children in the neighborhood that walk directly under this tree during the school year. So we really need to control this hive and do some more extraction. So on this same trip, after we got done using the scope cam, and this is still scope cam footage you see here, that's why the quality is very low, but it gave us a really good indication of what it looks like inside that tree and what numbers we might be dealing with. And clearly there was a lot of comb, which indicates there's going to be a lot of bees, and we needed to be ready to collect them. So as you see here, it wasn't long before the bees started attacking the camera light. That's what's happening here, as the bees are throwing their body toward the light of the camera, and they're blocking the view of the camera. So we knew it was about time to get ready to collect. We had brought along a couple of our wasp collection bottles that we use to collect the wasps alive and freeze them for venom immunotherapy. So we decided to use those same collection bottles for the bees that we take out of this tree. And you'll see that process here in a moment. But first we just took a minute here to appreciate the activity inside this tree. It's amazing that even in frigid cold weather outside the tree, it could be below zero with blowing snow and icy conditions. No matter what the weather is like during the winter, these bees can absolutely live perfectly comfortably, just like this, just like you see them here, inside that hive, because they're able to warm it up, and it's completely habitable throughout the entire winter, no matter how cold it gets. So even though the footage here is a little bit low quality from the scope cam, it really does give you an excellent look at the life of a bee in the middle of winter in a feral colony, a wild colony out in the world, not in a managed hive. This is how they survive in trees and other places that they live with no human intervention at all. They're pretty amazing creatures. Wasps, for example, will all die off, mostly in the wintertime. When the weather gets cold, the old queens die, all the workers die, and only the hibernating queens, the new queens who were born at the very end of the season, will hibernate over winter in some protected environment, and just the queen will come out and start a new nest in the spring. Whereas these bees, they just keep going. The colony just continues to thrive throughout the winter, and not all of them survive. Some hives die off because they run out of food. They don't have enough stored up or enough population to stay warm inside a frigid, cold environment. But clearly this colony did just fine. We had a relatively warm winter again this season. Climate change in Indiana has made our winters shorter and warmer and wetter than they used to be, as opposed to cold and frigid and snowy. So it's a little easier for bees to survive these days, but it's still pretty remarkable that the colony can survive throughout the winter. So here we stopped filming with the scope cam, and we started to set up the gear to do the extraction. Enough bees came right out at us that we didn't film most of the extraction, but we caught some of the end of it here. Working on extracting some bees. They were very much active in there. And so we had a few come out to attack, but they're unable to sustain an attack in the cool weather, which is part of the reason why we came now. We have a hose connected to the bee vac, and we're collecting them inside a jug, similar to what we do with wasps. And so far there's a fairly good collection. We've gotten a couple of bottles worth. As you can see here, hopefully you can see, this thing's full of bees. It filled up so quickly we had to get a second container, and that one's currently hooked up now. Meanwhile, on the other side, there's activity through their new entrance, which is right here in the center of the frame. There's foragers coming and going. So we did not film most of the extraction. We were a little too busy because there was a lot of bees coming at us at once. But here toward the end of the extraction, as you can see, honey started to fill up the tube and it got a little gummy in there, so it was becoming harder for the bees to come out, and there was just fewer of them to get out at that point. Since most of the population that was ready to come out and attack had been collected, there was still some in there, but it's harder for them now to come down the tube, so we kept at it for a little while, as you'll see here, but most of the bees have been collected by this point. And when the tubes get this gummed up inside, most of the bees that then pass through the tube, as you'll see here in a moment, end up getting covered in debris and honey, and they typically don't survive the ride for very long. I mean, they can get down into the container, but they are not going to be viable for relocation. So luckily most of them had already been collected, but you'll see a few here kind of slowly getting sucked down the tube that's all full of debris. So we'll just show you what that looks like. It's getting pretty gummy up in there. Honey's making it tough for them to come down the tube. About halfway full already. So we continue to shake the tube up and so forth inside the tree, and the reason we do that is because it causes the attack response for whatever bees are left in there. So you'll see a few more get sucked up and come down the hose, but most of them are already gone at this point. But there's a few left here that are still trying to attack, and when they do, if they get anywhere near that hose, they're getting sucked up. We're taking quite the tumbling ride all the way down that honey-filled tube. So eventually there was very little activity left. There was no more bees coming down. There were a couple foragers who had escaped out. We sucked up a couple of those from outside when they tried to enter into their new hole on the other side of the tree. But at this point we were ready to pretty much call it quits. We have to go clean up all the gear, get the hoses cleared out, and then we'll come back again in a couple of days and we'll try to do it again if there's any left inside that are still viable and able to fly around. But at this point the collection was coming to a close, so we were ready to wrap it up for the day. You can hear them in there. They're warming up the bottle. The bottle feels hot. As you see here, the first collection bottle had the most viable bees because they came out to attack when the hose was clear, and they had a nice good ride into the collection container. They were nice and active and noisy, and they had heated up their bottle so much that it was as warm as a person when you touched it. You can see how the second bottle has a fair amount of honey in it, and it was much lighter colored. And the bees in there were much less active. So if you feel these containers, they're as warm as a person. They're about 95 degrees, and they warm up that way inside the hive all winter. We'll try to find a local beekeeper willing to take just a few bees. It's February 17th, 2024. Very cold today, in the 20s all morning. Might get up into the 30s today, but it's very chilly. There's ice where there's water, and there's snow on the ground. Yet, even in these snowy conditions, bees survive just fine up in their tree. So we're back again today to check on a colony we started working on back in August of 23. They're up in this hole right here, right now. They used to be in the other hole over here. They are to some degree still, because the hive takes up the whole cavity of this inner tree. But we're going to look and see what's left of them today. We took out over 4,000 of them just a couple days ago. So we're going to take a look again today now that it's super cold out, because it makes it very hard for them to attack. They'll come out to attack, but then they'll feel the cold and they'll fly right back into the nest rather than sustain an attack, and that's what we're looking for. Make it a little easier to extract them with our hoses. So what we're using today is our typical bee vac, but we have an extra long hose on it that's a small diameter hose that'll fit inside those knot holes in the tree. And we're going to collect the bees in this container. And before we do that, we're going to take the scope cam here and we're going to take a look at the bees inside the tree before we disturb them. So let's go do that now. So here's the scope cam footage from February 17th of 24. This was just a couple days after the footage you saw earlier in this video that we shot on the 14th. Here we're going back into the smaller of the two holes on the tree. This is the newer hole that they established their nest in as a new entry point after we had originally vacuumed them out of the other side of the tree in August, and then again in February, just a couple of days ago here. But they are still there. You see more of them clustering more to the right of the frame. Problem was we could not fit our gear into this tiny knot hole that they used in this side of the tree. So we still have to try to extract them from the other side of the tree. The natural knot hole there on the other side is bigger, so we could fit our hoses through there. Problem is we have to bust up some comb to get to the bees. It's a little more awkward. It's a little less direct than it would have been if we been able to get through this side of the tree. But we had promised the owner of the tree that we would not damage the tree, cut the tree, or cut them out, because that would put a significant hole in the tree. Ideally, when you do a tree extraction, you would simply cut a hole that was large enough to remove all the bees, all the comb, all the honey that you could collect then and use yourself. But in this case, the tree could not be damaged. So we simply keep returning and vacuuming out whatever bees we can reach from whatever access points in the tree we have. You can see some of the snow and the ice is still here on the tree. It's still very cold out. It's 22 degrees during this particular extraction. And the bees were still nice and warm inside the tree, but outside it was chilly. In this clip, we're moving to the other side of the tree. We're going to go through the other knot hole on the other side to see if we can find any bees on that side of the nest. You see the plastic being removed here from the knot hole. That's how we've been able to keep the bees from exiting and entering this side of the tree since last August. We just keep that plastic wrap in there. As we got inside here, some of the bees that had been stirred up on the other side that we were looking at earlier had started to come over here, but in general, they seem to be more clustered on the other side of the nest than they do on this side. Still, this was the side we had to go through in order to get access to them because the other side is too small for the hoses to get through. Here we're taking a closer look at some of the comb on this side of the nest. Maybe some of you bee experts out there can tell us what we're looking at here. Is this larva, or is this stored capped honey, or is this pollen? Leave a comment and reference the timeline you're looking at in that particular clip to let us know your answers. So as you can see here, most of the bees were not on this side of the tree. The nest itself looks pretty healthy, but the bees were clustered on the other side near the knot hole that we can't get our hoses through. So we were going to have to break through some of this comb for sure if we were going to reach them from this larger knot hole. So that's exactly what we had to do. We took the hose and we would just thrust it through as far as we could get it, break through some of this comb, and then we were able to access the bees on the other side and stir them up enough to get them to move a little bit, which is what we need to get them into the hose. Here's a good look at a structure they build out of propolis and wax in order to attach the comb to the inner side of the tree cavity. Propolis is made out of tree resin that they collect out in the wild, and they sort of convert it into a heavy glue, and that glue holds everything together in there or covers up things they don't want in there. The resin material or the propolis is usually pretty dark. Sometimes it's black. So if you see a lot of that inside a beehive or a colony, that's what you're looking at. So once we had the scope cam footage, we went ahead and plugged up the hole again with the plastic wrap that we use for that purpose, and we prepared our gear to get ready to do the next extraction. All right, so we're up in the tree now with the bee vac, and we just stuck the scope cam down here. We have a few bees on this side of the tree. Most of them are on the other side, near this other hole over here. Right here is the other hole. Most of them are clustered up in this area. But once we make some noise over here and cause a commotion, a lot of them will come over here to attack, and then we'll get them sucked up, hopefully. It's so cold, I'm not quite sure how they'll react, but let's find out. This is a variable speed bee vac, which is great. So you can set the suction to whatever is useful for you. That's pretty good. Come on, bees, come out and play. We're starting to get a little stirred up. All right, we're starting to get a few in here now. let's see how we do. Anybody want to rumble today? Come on, guys. Definitely smaller population than we had the other day. Let's see if we can get them to come out toward the light on the camera here. So far we're not getting too many, just a few. It was so cold out on this day that the camera started to fail here. We couldn't get it to function properly. It started to go black on the screen and shut itself down. So we had to go on with the rest of the job without filming it. But we were able to warm up the camera enough to show you what the collection looked like later here. So it got so cold that the camera cut off and stopped working, so I wasn't able to film much of this for you. But we got another haul of bees out of there today. Definitely several hundred, maybe up to, I don't know, 1,000. Basically, they're so cold, they're immobile right now. Hopefully we can revive them when they warm up. But if you look closely, you can see small wax plates. These are the small plates that come off of the wax glands on their abdomens. And these wax pieces, these little white flakes, that's what the bees will chew up in order to make wax honeycomb. And you can see those little flakes all over this container. I'm not sure if you can focus on that or not. What you see inside the red circle here is a good representation of the wax scales. These little pieces of wax come off the glands on their abdomens, and they use these to build the nest. Man, it's cold today. See ice on the truck, snow in the bed, icicles hanging down from the truck, along with the rust. So if you look inside, you can see they're starting to wake up. They're starting to stir. We brought them inside where they're warmer now, so they're all taking a little nappy right now, but they'll be starting to stir again here pretty quickly. You see them all starting to move a little bit. They're coming back to life because we're warming them up inside, and we'll see how they do. So as you can see, they're starting to wake up inside the container. They're all starting to stir and come back to life after they've been knocked out by the cold. Pretty soon they'll start grooming and cleaning up and getting ready to be transferred out to a local beekeeper if we can find someone to take a very small number of bees. They're starting to get warm enough to fly, as you can see, start buzzing around inside the container. But as you can see, they're quite active. They're still pretty noisy, so we should be able to save a bunch of them. So that's it for today's episode. Thanks for riding along with us. Hopefully now you know how bees survive in the wintertime inside hollow trees and places like that. They do just fine. They're nice and toasty warm in there all winter. And sometimes we try to get them out early so that when they get real active in the spring, they're not as dangerous to the homeowners around those trees. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.